Vanakkam, Namaste, good evening, and my Japanese friend, correct me if I am wrong, Konnichiwa, correct? Thank you. Well, I was wondering when I was preparing this talk whether it will be out of place to talk about technology replacing sex. Now, after hearing the previous speaker saying that in Japanese 47% are sexless marriages, I think this will not be out of place to say technology is going to replace sex very soon. Well, we all do not know when and how did life begin. That's a story which all of us have to read and read. Still, we do not know. It probably began years and years, millions of years back in the primordial soup, where earth, star, water came out of the Big Bang. It was all a molten lava. Then the chemistry started working. The inorganic ones became organic ones. Then the first life was formed as a gene, an RNA, which is DNA. Then they coalesced to form the selfish gene, and the selfish gene continues to propagate forever. The early forms were prokaryotes, then we are the eukaryotes, then we are what we are today. But remember, reproduction is a law of life. There's no reproduction, there's no life on earth. And today reproduction is primarily a byproduct of sex. Sex is the instinct. People are driven to sex by instinct. But surprising to hear that Japanese are not driven by the instinct. Sex to reproduce is mostly only in infertile couples. And we make their sex life miserable by advising them to have sex on particular days of their life, particular days of ovulation. Sex and reproduction have been dealing the last 6 decades due to the advent of several techniques. Initially, it was all asexual reproduction. The unicellular organisms were happy dividing, growing, dividing, growing. Then when they started coalescing and forming multicellular organism, then they started having this sexual reproduction. Then it, of course, sexual. Some of the early organisms were bisexual. Remember, these are our forefathers. But you like to think only monkey as your forefather, you are stopping half the way. These are our forefathers. They were initially bisexual. Then we had this unisexual situation. Then we had separate sexes. Then, of course, came the birth control pill. Until the advent of birth control pill, every act of sex carried a risk of reproduction. People were scared about producing a child. So with the advent of birth control pill and the contraceptive methods, sex no longer carried the risk of reproduction. Reproduction continues to be a byproduct of sex. The 5th phase was when we had assisted reproduction introduced. Until then, every act of reproduction required sex. Now with the advent of assisted reproduction, sex is no longer required for reproduction. Well, these are the different phases, the unicellular organs, then it grows on to reach to the stage of. But I still like to re-emphasize reproduction is the law of life. But remember, people have always tried to impede reproduction by using contraception, enhance it by using different fertility measures. And today the latest is, of course, editing the genes by the technology of CRISPR and Cas9. The 5th phase was assisted reproduction, where we could put in a single sperm. With the advent of ICSI, all you require is a single sperm per oocyte, and if you have 10 oocytes, you require only 10 sperm, and you can imagine this couple's reproductive life is over. The 6th phase is, today remember, all of us are products of reproductive lottery. Of the million sperms which our fathers injected into a mother's vagina, we do not know which one is going to fertilize the oocyte. So it remains a lottery until the advent of this PGD, PGS, and CRISPR-Cas9 technology. Today, you can identify whether the baby is normal or not to a reasonable extent by the PGD or PGS, and if it's defective, do an embryo editing by doing the CRISPR-Cas9 technique. And if this is not enough, the next phase probably would be in vitro gametogenesis, in vitro organogenesis with pluripotent stem cells, and therefore I could have my organs replaced indefinitely, which means my liver is functioning, failing, I could have a liver replaced, heart is failing, I could have heart replaced, and virtually every organ replaced. So death would probably be only by accident or by shooting and not by the natural means. This is, of course, utopian, but I'm just giving a situation where if people are going to remain sexless, they need not remain childless. This is the first event which made this event, 25th July 78, when the birth of the first IVF baby by Louis Brown. The next major advance was 1992 when ICSI was done. Between 1990 and 2003, a huge effort, multinational effort to map the human genome was done. During the same time, Yuri Verlinsky identified a technique of PGD by which you can identify an embryo which is defective. Then came the PGD consortium and the birth of the baby through the most modern technique of next generation sequencing. The Human Genome Project took 13 years. Today you could have your genome analyzed in a few hours' time. Well, this is the conventional reproduction where a man and a woman make a lot of effort to produce a baby. Well, things have become a lot more complicated now. Today in a meeting, say 50 years from now, each one has to identify himself or herself as, I'm an IVF baby, I'm a donor sperm baby, I'm a donor egg baby, or all kind of impossible situations. We have a third-party reproduction where it could be an egg donor, sperm donor, or surrogate. Roughly 4% of babies born in some European countries are ART babies. There could be a fourth party involved, egg donor, sperm donor, and the intended parents. There could be a fifth party involved, where egg donors, sperm donors, surrogate, and foster parents. There's another situation where there could be a mitochondrial donor, so in reality there could be six people involved in producing a child. If this is not enough confusion, there is also a situation of designer baby. But remember, designer baby and test tube babies are the journalist terminologies, not the scientific terminology. What it really means is the baby's genetic makeup has been altered in one way or other, either to remove a genetic defect or to enhance. Enhancement is still not possible, but removing a genetic defect is possible. Well, there are a lot of possibilities of a designer baby, but at the moment it remains theoretical and not in practice. Well, this baby was the first one born. Adam Nash was born to the parents. They had a child born called Molly Nash, which had Fanconi anemia. This child required cord blood transfusion or a bone marrow transplant. So the couple decided to go and have a second baby, which will be HLA compatible with the first baby. So they had IVF. Those embryos, or the embryos available, they chose an embryo which had HLA compatibility with the previous child. So this child is Adam Nash, and this Adam Nash cord blood was used to cure Molly of her Fanconi anemia. That's really a designer baby. The baby was designed to cure its sibling, sister, of the problem. This raised a lot of hue and cry, but subsequently it died down. Subsequently, UK also accepted this model, and now it's fairly standard practice. Well, this is a technique of designing a baby where you can remove the affected gene or get an embryo which is not affected. Why do you want to design a baby? As I told you, there are more than 90 conditions which can be identified by doing a pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. To genetic enhancement, well, it has not been proven yet, though people keep claiming this, that you would like to increase intelligence, musical talent, athleticism. But remember, most of these talents of intelligence, athleticism are all primarily perspiration based. Inspiration only contributes 10%, otherwise it's all effort. There are pros and cons about designer babies. Parents always desire the best for the children. Given the choice, most of you know that you want your child to go to the best school. Therefore, it's nothing unusual for a parent to ask for enhancement. But is it possible? Should the government interfere? Well, I would personally think that government have no business in interfering in these things, but they should regulate it because definitely the technique should be proven. People should not be exploited. Ethics, remember, ethics always catches. It's very late to catch up with the reality, and therefore ethics guidelines should be there, but it should not restrict a scientific development. The problem with cons would be the procedure is still experimental. People are being exploited, saying that you could enhance things. Remember, you are trying to alter the embryo. An embryo cannot give consent. If 25 years down the line the child is not keen on being a musician, you are trying to improve the musical talent, what are we going to do? This is another important thing. Are we working against nature? Yes, we are working against nature, but how justified are we doing in this kind of manipulations? And are we commodifying the child? These are questions where there are no clear answers for that. And another important thing is, if IQ 160 is considered today a landmark, a benchmark, probably 10 years down the line, IQ 260 would be a benchmark. So what are we going to do with this old model of 160? These are children, remember that. Well, somebody long time back, about in the 80s, a Nobel laureate, not an ordinary person, decided that people are producing children without any proper kind of. He said, I'm going to start a Nobel cement bank. He did it. He did it in California, and he said, I'll go to store the noble semen bank. He couldn't get anybody else's semen except his own semen sample. And he got semen sample from Stanford and other universities. But over the course of time, he died a natural death. The other techniques which are in the pipeline are gene therapy, CRISPR-Cas9, and germline gene therapy. Well, in vitro gametogenesis, a lot of work is going on. No baby has been produced, no human baby has been produced yet. Well, this is why I raised this question, but I think the previous speaker made my life easy by saying that I was wondering would sex become redundant. She tells me it's already redundant in 47% of the Japanese couple. Well, another important question is, if in vitro gametogenesis is possible, would men become redundant? Do we really men at all? You can produce a spermatozoa from a somatic cell if proper conditions are provided. But this is the Noble Semen Bank. There's a book on this called Genius Factory, and of course the bank had to close because there are not enough takers subsequently. Remember, intelligence is not all in your semen sample or in the sperm. As I mentioned before, intelligence is 90% perspiration. Gene therapy is putting the nucleic acid into the gene. The problem would be, would it be incorporated? The hazards of gene therapy is you're putting a gene there, it has to be incorporated and express itself. And when you're putting a gene, you can also produce insertional mutagenesis. And what other problems it would create, nobody knows. So it still remains a technique confined only to patients with problems in or diseases. There have been deaths with this condition also, this therapy. The latest controversy in this area is embryo editing. There have been 2 reports from China where they managed to edit the embryo. The problem, the advantage of this would be, if you edit the embryo, the future generation is cured of this particular condition, what we call as germline gene therapy. If on the other hand, if you're going to do a particular somatic gene therapy, you're only correcting a particular disease for that individual. Well, when you're doing this, you can also go, if you're trying to remove a segment of the DNA, you can end up with removing a larger segment and have a greater problems. Germline therapy is probably a better cure if it can be well established, because it eliminates disease totally from the future generations. Currently, we are only doing somatic gene therapy, which only eliminates the disease in the concerned individual. Well, this gives you the comparison between germline and somatic gene therapy. As it mentions, somatic gene therapy is well established. Germline gene therapy remains a pipe dream at this stage. That pictorially describes, you see, you can have a liver restored, you can have a cardiac restored, all this is possible. But a more definite cure would be a germline gene therapy. But this is now common practice in many countries. In India, this is banned primarily because of social reasons. Having a baby of desired sex, all you require is an IVF, have an embryo, do an embryo biopsy and confirm whether it's a boy or a girl. It is easily possible, but as I mentioned, this is forbidden in India for social reasons. Well, with all this question, I don't know how many of you noticed the first slide, it said Homo Deus. We are all Homo sapiens. I do not know how many of you know the meaning of the word Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens means wise man. I think we called ourselves wise men. And as all of you know, we are not really wise because no other species does a self-destruction. We are the only species who do self-destruction. Now we are going one step further, trying to create an Homo Deus. Homo Deus is God-man. We want to become immortal. We want to prolong our life. Is it really going to happen? And if it's going to happen, are we going to be having this kind of situation where you're going to be immortal and maybe you have a Wi-Fi engraved in you? And some of you may know the story of Bhasmasura, where he did self-destruction. Are we leading towards? We have done enough to do self-destruction. I think the victims are there. The Japanese are there. The atom bomb did so much destruction. And today we have so many atom bombs to destroy the world so many times over. And if you're going to find ways of becoming immortal, are we going to become Bhasmasuras? I have no answer for this. I think you have to give me an answer for this. Well, this tells you how it all started years back as asexual reproduction. They are truly our forefathers or foremothers. Then it became sexual reproduction. And today, as I mentioned, non-sexual reproduction is in vogue in many parts of the world. So let me conclude by saying that reproduction remains the law of life, but no longer it's a byproduct of sex. And of course, I didn't know that there's going to be a paper on this, and This is from the newspaper. Young Japanese are saying, I'm sure maybe the old Japanese are also saying, sex is boring. And technology has made slaves instead of saving us time. All of you know that today most of you can't live without a mobile phone. We have a new edition called nomophobia, no mobile phobia. So this is what's happening. So it's not saving us time. We have no time for even such a fundamental act like sex. But if you look at economic point of view, in most men, one act of masturbation, one act of sex, sperm aspiration would give us enough spermatozoa for all the children he plans to have. One stimulation would give enough oocyte for all the children she has. Is it then more cost effective to indulge in? Why should they waste their time in courtship, dating, marriage, foreplay and sex, and all the risk attended with it? I am not propagating. Please understand that I am giving you this scenario. Would sexual reproduction be redundant? You are the best judge. Thank you.